I want to talk about the cumulative case for the resurrection of Jesus, because I was watching one of your previous live streams, and
First of all,
you use some analogy.
hang on 1 second? Are you a Christian?
Yeah, I'm a Christian. Yes.
Okay.
You used some analogy. You said something about 1,000 bankrupt companies don't add up to be one good one, or something.
Unless Trump owns them. Unless Trump owns them.
Hmm.
I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Well, I just think that it's possible you might misunderstand what's meant by a cumulative case here, because the way history, I think, is done is you don't look at, say, we have a piece of evidence for the resurrection, piece of evidence A, and then we have piece of evidence B, and they both, and if you look at them in isolation, they might have perfectly good naturalistic explanations. But let's see, how should I put this?
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah. So you say piece of evidence A and piece of evidence B, right? These both have good naturalistic explanations on their own, but when you put them together and look at them both, they don't really, there's no good explanation for them naturalistically.
Mm-hmm. Unless these pieces of evidence are not independent of each other, right?
Yeah, I suppose that would be.
Okay, so I'll pick something specific out of the Gospels, and we'll check it out. Like, what's a specific piece of evidence for the resurrection from the Gospels?
The empty tomb.
Okay, this exact one I went with a previous caller. So let's say I told you that in a diary written 20, 30 years after the flying man flew, that the spot where he took off from, the moment he took off from that spot was found empty. Like, in other words, I'm saying that he was there at the edge of the cliff and then he wasn't. So how do you?
I'd like to engage with you on this, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's a fair comparison, because the empty tomb. At the time when the Christians were preaching this, I believe, now I'm not really a historian here, but I believe that was something that would have been easily falsifiable. Like it would have been pretty obvious if the tomb was not empty.
Yeah. Well, before we go on, what's really interesting to me is, if you look at the New Testament in general, what percentage of it do you think is historically accurate? What percentage do you think might not be?
That is a good question.
Because this is the real issue, right?
Yeah, I think that's very hard to evaluate.
Maybe let me ask it a different way. Is there anything that reads as historical in the New Testament that you think probably didn't happen in the past?
Oh, anything that reads as historical?
Yeah.
Well, probably not.
Okay. See, and this is the difference between you and me. Like, and I think a lot of Christians, at least of certain types of denominations, they will read the New Testament as a historical narrative. I don't.
Okay.
And so when I see a story about an empty tomb, I ask myself, okay, what's more likely, that a man actually was in the tomb, dead, and then rose from the dead and left? Or it's a story just saying that happened? Or let's say,
sure.
But you can even give the New Testament the benefit of the doubt and say there was an empty tomb, but what's more likely? The body was stolen. This is not my answer to it, but it's still more likely the body was stolen than a guy actually.
Sure. Yeah, sure. If you take that one piece in isolation, yes.
Yes, but here's the point: you notice that you've agreed with me every step of the way,
and I understand.
And I'm saying we could do this for 3 hours, but yet somehow when we cram everything together at one time and just let it float in our minds, it all of a sudden becomes a cumulative case.
That's not the point at all. It's, if you look at other alternative explanations, there's holes in how it explains the evidence, right? We have to start getting ad hoc and things like that.
Well,
that's what I'd say.
Yeah, but still, you're assuming that it's historical to begin with, a lot of it, right? Like that's the big contention. Like if I told you that I find 90% of the New Testament not historical, like, we're basically done this conversation. It's, well, how would you explain this, Doug? I say, well, this is a story. It's not historical. There's nothing to explain. It's like trying to explain the evidence for the Chronicles of Narnia. Well, how do you explain this part of the narrative, Doug, if it didn't really happen? Well, it's a story, Evan. And so we're at an impasse at that point. Then the conversation shifts to, well, why do we think this is historical to begin with? Right?
Yeah, in my opinion, there probably are reasons to think that much of it is historical, but I'm not going to be able to defend that stuff specifically to you right now. I'm not a historian, I guess. So.
Well, let me ask you this. Yeah. You look young to me.
Yeah.
How old
Maybe.
are you?
I'm 21.
You're 21. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember a time when you weren't a Christian?
Yeah.
How old were you when you became a Christian?
Well, I kind of flipped back and forth. I was raised a Christian, and then I became not a Christian, and now I am again. So
at age 18, 19?
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
What caused you to go back to Christ?
I would say I largely got back into it because of philosophy. I would say I started doing some.
But what got you into philosophy?
I was taking a philosophy class at the time, and that it really interested me. So I started looking into some things and came to the conclusion that God existed, and from there I kind of built my way back up to Christianity.
So before you took that philosophy class, did you call yourself an atheist?
Yeah, I would probably say like agnostic. I was probably agnostic atheist for maybe probably 6 months to a year, somewhere in there. I would have called myself that.
But how did you actually get back to Christianity? Because philosophy classes, and at least at university, they don't teach you the gospel.
Right. But it was just sort of it stimulated my thoughts, I guess, and I started. I know that's a good question. I just started researching, I guess, arguments for the existence of God. That was a topic that was covered in the philosophy book that we were reading. So,
but a God could exist, and Christianity is still false, correct?
Oh yeah, that's completely true. But
so what got you to believe that Christianity was true?
It's a combination of the philosophy stuff and the historical stuff. Okay. I also started. Yeah, I looked into the history of the resurrection and whatnot.
And when you were looking into the history of the resurrection, what did you find on the opposing side of why maybe this isn't historical?
I saw a lot of stuff like just talking about, there's the mythicist theory, right? That it's just a made-up myth, and there's also there's a few different ones. I can't think of them off the top of my head right now.
But you found none of them compelling?
I didn't find any of them compelling compared to the resurrection argument, I guess. And here's something that I might concede to you, that I don't think that historical evidence provides an incontrovertible proof, right? It just gives us a strong possible explanation. And I think that of all the possible explanations for the resurrection, to explain the evidence surrounding Jesus, I think the resurrection sort of fulfills the evidence the best. But I think we also need some more philosophical framing to get to the point of actually believing that it happened, I guess.
What, like, for example, what type of philosophical framing do you need to prove, or not prove, sorry, cancel, I hate that word, to demonstrate, no, cancel that word, to raise your confidence that Christianity is true?
This gets complicated. I would say you can start with thinking about a simple way of putting it would be just start thinking about the attributes of God. Okay, what do we know about God? And then from there, we can start thinking, okay, now what would we expect God to do based on these attributes? You see what I'm saying?
So what did you find out about the nature of God that would make you think that Christianity is true?
Well, for one, God is he is loving. That is a big part of his nature. He's so I would say that the story of Jesus makes a lot of sense in that context. How
did you determine that God's loving, number one, and number two, how does that get you closer to Christianity?
Oh, well, there's some philosophical reasons for why I would think that God is loving.
Like what?
And what?
Like what? So I'm talking philosophy, not Christianity. How did you determine that God was loving before you even became a Christian?
There's a lot of arguments about it. I just I read a lot of philosophy about it. I read some arguments, and there's a book called The Experience of God by David Bentley Hart. Highly recommend that book to anyone that's interested in this stuff. So that kind of outlines a lot of arguments as to why God is, as to the nature of God and how he operates, I guess you could say. So
okay.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can speed this up a little bit. Is the bottom line that because God's loving, he would give his only begotten son and to atone for the sins of the world? And since God would desire that atonement, that redemption, that he would come into flesh and have the desire to raise himself up on the third day, that sort of thing?
Yeah. basically.
Yeah. One thing to think about, though, if you're using philosophy to get there, that God would desire to raise a person, a human, up from death, is how often does that happen? Like, assume God's real. How often does God raise people up from the dead?
Well, it would only really need to happen once.
Okay, so God doesn't really, he's not in the business, he's not in the habit of raising people from the dead, correct?
I would say correct.
Okay, what if I was to say, I am God in flesh? Would that raise the probability that God would raise me from the dead when I die? The answer's no, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that.
Okay, well, there's a lot of people in history who have claimed to be God who are not Jesus. Are you saying that those people, when they died, they're more likely to rise from the dead because they claim to be God in flesh?
Well, not because they claim to be. I mean,
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, because
being a Christian, I would say, I don't know. You might have stumped me a little bit on this one. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to.
Yeah, and we can go on with this because where I'm leading you, as you know, a manipulator for Satan, is you can have this concept of God being loving and all these things, but you're still stuck with it's called natural theology. We don't see people rising from the dead very often, even if there's a God. So, and does the fact that a guy in first century says, "Hey, I am God," does that change anything? No. What if there's even claims about him doing miracles and preaching that the kingdom, like there's people who claim to do miracles today and who are God. Does that mean when they die, they're more like God would desire to raise them? No. So the real issue here, and I think this is the crux of the matter, is you believe that when you read the New Testament, you're reading mostly history. And when I read it, and when actually most of the planet reads it, they don't view it as mostly history, except for maybe 2 billion of the 7 billion people. And even then, you know, the 2 billion are not true Christians. So what we'll do is I'll contact the head office in Wichita, and they will send you your agnostic/atheist card.
I don't think so.
Why not?
Yeah.
Isn't it, do you need strong evidence that Christianity is false to not believe it? Or do you just need your doubts to be raised enough to say Christianity is likely not true?
I would just say I would have to be shown that my the evidence that I accept isn't good enough. That's what I would say.
What would be the top 3 pieces of evidence for you?
Top 3? Do you mean
for the resurrection of Jesus Christ? What's the top 3? What's the first 3 things that pop into your head?
I would say that just the eyewitness testimony, the empty tomb, and what else? I would say, I would say his appearance to lots of people after he died and was resurrected.
Okay. So eyewitness testimony. Would you believe that my ancestor flew if a person writes 2 decades later that they were eyewitness to a man flying?
Back to this again. See, I'm not sure.
No, but you said show me evidence that. No,
right.
Give me reasons to think my evidence is not good enough, right?
I'm just not sure we can make any progress here because it's a very
Evan, we are making progress.
Yeah.
Because we got it down to that the way you would leave Christianity is to have reasons to doubt that the evidence you have is evidence, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I asked you for what's the first 3 things that pop into your head. And you gave me eyewitness testimony, empty tomb, and the appearances to Jesus to many people, which I think 1 and 3 they're all kind of related. But if I gave you a document that says that 20 years ago, a guy flew, is that good enough evidence to believe a guy flew unaided?
No, not on its own.
And you're right. And what if it's also said that 500 people, but they don't name any names? The guy doesn't name any names, specific names of the 500. Is that good enough?
Same guy writing the thing, right? No.
Yeah. And then so the guy writes about 20 years after that that the guy flew in front of 500, in front of 12 of his best friends, and finally to a guy named Myron, who's the author of this document. I think you and I are the same. This is not good enough evidence, right? To believe.
Right.
Yeah. And what if the diaries that were written about the flying man or another 10 to 20 years after that, and they're written, there's no date on it. There's no where it was written. It doesn't say, the person who writes it doesn't name themselves. In other words, it's anonymous. And it says that Jesus appeared to so-and-so. We could say the flying man flew in front of so-and-so. Is that good enough evidence to believe the flying man flew? Is that good enough evidence to believe Jesus rose from the dead?
Probably not.